about Savitri. So Sonia tells me that she's been doing special research on book 2, the book of the Traveller of the Worlds, which explores all the planes of existence. And I'm very much looking forward to this talk, which I'm sure is going to be extremely valuable and illuminating. Before we start,
sitting where I'm looking upwards at Sri Aurobindo, and as I'm sure many speakers have felt the same, he is there. I may make my salutations to him, and I may offer at his feet the words that I shall speak today. I don't turn my head, but I know that behind me there is the mother, and she is descending the stair, as if through a magical gateway in the wall that opens into another time and space. And I know that the mother is looking up to Sri Aurobindo. I feel among friends here, I feel almost the spirit of Dr. Nadkarni standing beside me. I'm sorry that Mira Nadkarni cannot be here, because if she were here, she could confirm many of the things that I am going to say about a very remarkable man. Sri Aurobindo wrote, "We labour that from us may rise a larger seeing man with nobler heart." And those of you who knew the professor will realize that this is a very true description of Nadkarni himself. He was a modest man, but totally devoted to his belief that India needed to hear the message of Sri Aurobindo. And he devoted, as I know, having had the pleasure of his company for 8 years in Singapore, that all his spare moments were spent in trying to make sure that Sri Aurobindo's message was heard. He had come from the University of Hyderabad, where he was professor of linguistics, and he stayed with us in Singapore for 8 years, during which he managed to come and speak to the Sri Aurobindo Society. We were a very small group in those days, almost every week. And he spoke with such fire and passion. One day, after he had been reading some lines from Savitri, and the entire room reverberated with the passion of his voice, I turned to Mira and I said, "Is he like this at home too?" And she said, "No, he's a very quiet man." Well, quiet he may have been, but effective he certainly was, because he is much loved and even now remembered with very great affection. I know that he took very seriously the need to spread the message of Sri Aurobindo throughout India. I want to read you a passage from the Mother, and this is very relevant, I think. India has become the symbolic representation of all the difficulties of modern mankind. India will be the land of its resurrection, the resurrection to a higher and truer life. That same thing which, in the history of the universe, made the earth the symbolic representation of the universe, so as to be able to concentrate the work on one point, That same phenomenon is taking place now. India represents all the terrestrial human difficulties, and it is in India that there will be a cure. And it is for this that I have been made to start Auroville. Very significant words, and I am delighted to be able to speak them again in Auroville itself. Now, Nadkarni spoke everywhere in India with such faith and such conviction. He didn't worry whether he had a large audience or a smaller audience. In fact, there were occasions, so Meera told me, when very few people attended the lecture, and once or twice, if I had understood her rightly, she herself was the only person in the audience. But still he spoke. Why? Because somebody might come in, somebody who needed to hear that message. And if not, well, I think he spoke because he wanted to imprint that message on the very air of India. This is the man that we remember and honor by this lecture tonight. Now, I chose to talk about Book 2. It's one of the most marvelous but enigmatic books in the whole of Savitri. And you may think that it was a rather ambitious plan on my part, bearing in mind that the mother had said in her message of 1958 that it was impossible for the ordinary human mind to understand Savitri because it needed spiritual experience which we humans do not have. Well, that was then, and then it was true. But I am an old person now, and I am old enough to have seen the difference. My friends, we live in the age of Sri Aurobindo. He did not spend years in the solitude of one room for no reason at all. He wanted to bring down something of the higher consciousness and fix it in the earth atmosphere. And in this, I know that he succeeded. I know because I am old enough to see the difference. You know that old age brings very few advantages. But one of those advantages is hindsight, and that's no small advantage. It's almost a miracle. You see, hindsight changes the way in which we perceive things in a very important way. Let me give you some examples. Those words that you spoke in anger to a friend and agonized about it afterwards, when you look at them with hindsight, you see that what happened was that a relationship was cemented by their honesty and not destroyed at all. That terrible mistake you made in your youth, look at it with hindsight, and it has changed. No longer does it appear to be a terrible mistake, but it appears to have been an opportunity and a blessing in disguise. That is what hindsight does, and we all need it. And we older folk have more of it than anybody else. It's a free gift, as it were. And it's a gift that goes on giving, because when you look back with hindsight, you can see the way that the future is being prepared. And that is also quite useful thing. Now, I would like to take you back to a very fateful year, and that year is 1946. In 1946, obviously, it was the year of the Japanese surrender, the end of the Second World War, and I well remember that there was singing and dancing in the streets, and there was a great deal of rejoicing because the war was over. And I also saw that many good things happened despite the fact that we were at war. People were brought together in a very real sense of unity. Women were called up to do men's jobs and so were liberated from the drudgery of housework. And things like that happened that weren't bad. But there's a dark side to 1946 too. And that dark side is the mass destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The end of the war came about at a terrible cost. We suddenly found ourselves in the nuclear age, and that changed everything. For a long time, there had been a kind of confidence in the world, and that was shaken. Sri Aurobindo believed and taught that life was inherent in all matter. Now, what happens when you split the atom? If life is inherent in every atom of matter, something rather terrible happens when you split the atom. Life has held her contrary, death, in her firm, warm embrace since the beginning of time. And suddenly, the atom is split and death is let loose upon the world, and that doom still hangs over us. Now, what did Sri Aurobindo do in 1946? Of course, he had thrown his weight behind the Allies during the war. And suddenly, that responsibility, he watched the war very closely, that responsibility was taken from him, and the first thing he did was to turn to Savitri. And turning to Savitri, immediately he turned to Book 2, The Traveller of the Worlds, Book of the Traveller of the Worlds, and he recast it totally. And it became that immense, long canto, 14 cantos, 14 long cantos in the book, and I think about 200 pages. Why did he do this? And why did he do it at that time? I believe he poured all his own knowledge, all his spiritual experiences, all his spiritual discoveries into Book 2. And he did so because we live in difficult times. We live in an age of transition. He wanted us to know. He wanted us to have this knowledge. He wanted to make it available to us if we will look and seek for it there. Is it too ambitious to think that we can know the mind that was in Sri Aurobindo when he wrote Book 2 of Savitri? I think not. I think that that information that is there is relevant to our time, and we need it. Relevant in particular is the role of King Aswapati. And I ask myself, what was that role? When he entered the 14 kingdoms of the world Stair, what was he doing there? Now, this is a question which others have studied in great detail, and I'm sure that others will continue to study in great detail. But I have not the intention of making a literary study tonight or a philosophical study of the content of Book 2. No, that would be the equivalent of pouring the ocean into a drop. And you certainly can't do that in a short talk of 1 hour. So instead, I will have to feel myself, I feel confronted with those 14 cantos of the world Stair. I feel like a tiny butterfly who hovers over a vast tract of rare flowers. And over this vast landscape, this tiny butterfly can land on one blossom alone to sip its nectar. And that one blossom for me will have to be what interests me most. And that is the role of King Aswapati. What was he doing when he entered the kingdoms of the Stair? Now, it seems to me that he had some kind of avataric mission to see things differently. As we have seen with hindsight, things change when you see them differently. He was the man who had broken the bounds of consciousness and time. He was a seer. He was represented, he represented humanity at a high point of humanity's spiritual achievement. Obviously, Aswapati represents Sri Aurobindo himself. So what is he telling us about the way forward? He's telling us, I think, that we have to learn how to change the past by looking at it differently. If we can look at it through the eyes of consciousness, through the eyes of a new consciousness, we will actually see things differently, and we will see that there is only one cause. We will see through the illusion of cause and effect. Cause and effect are an illusion because we are immersed in time. In eternity, there is no such illusion because cause and effect happen simultaneously. But in time, it appears that they are very firmly bound together. And this is what Sri Aurobindo calls determination's iron rule. We can change that. We can change it by seeing things differently. And I believe that Aswapati's mission on the Stair was to redeem the human past, was to dissolve the human karmic debt, if you like. That mutual debt that man owes to the Supreme, and the Supreme owes to man, that can be repaid. The karmic consequences of our past errors can be dissolved. And then the way is cleared. The way is cleared for a new consciousness to descend. That is the interpretation and I think the lesson of Book 2. And there is another lesson as well, which is of great interest to people who want to or aspire to be followers of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. How do we proceed at this difficult time? For we are now in the dim twilight of the last days of the Kali Yuga, a time of transition, a time of chaos, if you like, when everything that must go out of a manifestation rises and requires us somehow to deal with it. What should be our way forward? What is the message that Sri Aurobindo might have for us today? The mother had a warning. She said, "Truth or the abyss." Sri Aurobindo has a timely reminder for us. And it is this death-bound littleness is not all we are. It's also a message of hope, as well as a warning. We have to find more in ourselves than the littleness. The biggest affliction, the biggest danger, to my mind, facing the world today, is that we shall take our littleness for granted as the normal condition of humanity. We shall accept it. We shall aspire no more. This is human nature. It was always like this, and it always will be like this. So, let us paint our prison. Let us strengthen its bars. Forget to hope and aspire. And that is a very sad thing for the world if that attitude prevails. Now, what has brought it about? Partially, it's the demise and decline of the great religious traditions that our ancestors have relied on and turned to in times of trouble. The age, as Sri Aurobindo foretold, that age is over. We have to find the strength within ourselves to get out of that littleness, to aspire for something more, to find that something more and find it within ourselves, because we can't turn to anything outside ourselves anymore. It's all there. That capacity is within us. Sri Aurobindo brought it within our reach. That's the change that he made. So this is the message of our time, I think. And also the message of the mother. The mother said, "Ici même, it's here." That new consciousness is already here. It's so close. It's so close, she said. It's like the lining of a coat. Well, why don't we just take off our mental straitjacket and turn that mental straitjacket inside out? Why don't we aspire more and really try to discover within ourselves the mind that was in Sri Aurobindo? Now, I haven't said anything about the image of the stair. I wanted to read you something that I found in the works of Medananda. Medananda was one of the first people to recognize that Sri Aurobindo had brought something new into the world. And if I can find it among all these notes that I made. I always make hundreds of notes and then I forget all about them and talk about something completely different. what I've done tonight. No, I can't find it, but what I can find is a letter from Amal Kiran. And Amal Kiran wrote and defended with his usual clarity and lucid mind. He believed that it was possible to change the past. This letter may or may not have been published, but I received the recipient's permission to use it tonight. So here is what Amal has to say. He wrote to his correspondent, "I had once said, the past is the only thing that can change." Rather a cryptic and paradoxical pronouncement. The interpretations you have offered are all valid and perhaps partake, in their own ways, of what I meant. My meaning was, the past's character depends on the nature of the present to which it has led. Exactly what we've been talking about when we spoke of hindsight. No matter how unlovely it may look, it can become beautiful if somehow the present gets touched by a glow from beyond the usual series of events, the normal chain of cause and effect. Realizing the inadequacy, the wrong-headedness, the erring zigzag of times gone, we may awake keenly to the need of being different. The soul in us may arise to its creative sweet sadness at the sight of our lives and minds missing of the true way. A light from our depths may suddenly leap out in response to the sense of frailty and futility in all that we have done. Then the past alters its whole aspect and grows into a stepping stone towards the ideal. All its old appearances of a tale of mistakes and miseries and mischances, logically leading to nothing more than a variation on the same theme, or the human all too human, takes on a new significance and becomes, to put the matter in an extreme form, hell's hidden way to heaven. To let the past be what it has been to the outer consciousness, or to transmute its lines and hues by giving them a novel denouement, lies in our hands. And as the past is our only established possession in the presence of time, it is the sole thing that we have the power to reorientate by a spurt beyond our common selfhood. By such a spurt, we begin to see, behind all that has happened, the secret lover, our master, manipulating the twists and turns of our life. A strange scheme emerges into view. Everything falls into proper place, and all the scattered paths are seen to come together and point to our true home, and that is in the deep heart. At times, what has impressed us as a graving in granite disperses like a mist. The entire past can vanish if the soul can give itself entirely to the divine. The Mother has said that all karma can be wiped out at a stroke by a sweeping self-dedication to the divine. This would be changing the past in the most radical sense. This idea of a sudden conversion is not only a part of Indian tradition, it's also a part of the Western tradition. And here again, the number 14 it seems to be significant. In the old rituals of the Catholic Church, there is something called the Stations of the Cross. And in the old days, there were 14 of these Stations of the Cross. And if at any point on the journey, one walked around the church and paused before events in the life of Christ depicted on the walls, if at any time one was moved to tears or to true repentance by the sight of the suffering of Christ, all sins could be forgiven. That's rather like the idea that we have on the World's Fair when Aswapati sees that the errors of human nature can be wiped out, if only that they are suddenly seen in a new light. It's interesting that this number 14 comes up in these two very different contexts. You know, 14 cannot be a random number. There's no such thing as a random number when we are talking about the works of Sri Aurobindo. I don't know what is mysterious about the number 14. I asked a great expert in mathematics the other day, and he said it's twice 7. However, that's besides the point. Now, to go back to what's wrong with us now. This littleness, what does Sri Aurobindo mean by this littleness? I'd like to read his description of littleness, if I can find it here. Here it is, I think. As long as the human animal is lord, and a dense nether nature screens the soul, as long as intellect's outward gazing sight serves earthly interest and creature joys, an incurable littleness pursues his days. Ever since consciousness was born on earth, life is the same in insect, ape, and man, its stuff unchanged, its way the common root. If new designs, if richer details grow, and thought is added, and more tangled cares, if little by little it wears a brighter face, still, even in man, the plot is mean and poor. A gross content prolongs his fallen state. His small successes are failures of the soul. His little pleasures punctuate frequent griefs. Hardship and toil are the heavy price he pays for the right to live, and his last wages, death. So when I say that the affliction of littleness is, to my mind, a danger to humanity's progress, on a par with the oceans being full of plastic pieces and our planet being threatened by climate change, it's something that I hope we can take more seriously. We do need to remember that we are not that littleness. And if we do not remember it, if we do not act upon it, if we cannot rouse ourselves to a greater aspiration, to a more sustained and serious effort to find within ourselves the capacities that lie there, waiting within us to be used, then Sri Aurobindo has worked in vain, which is impossible, The avatar does not work in vain. All we have to do is to live up to these expectations and avert a possible tragedy that may overtake this earth one day, sooner or later, but can be averted if we can thoroughly embrace the teaching that we have received. Now, I want to read what Medananda said, because he is one of the few people who recognized that Sri Aurobindo had done something remarkable. He had brought something new into the world. Yes, we haven't quite realized that. I'm afraid I don't seem to have it, despite I have hundreds of papers here. Yes, very well. I have a quarter of an hour left, and I should really be going through with you two significant but enigmatic passages that claim our attention in Book 2 of Savitri. Neither of them can be called a description in the usual sense of that word, but they both are a gateway opening into a world of direct knowledge that often translates itself into a true spiritual experience. This first passage comes from Canto 1 and serves to introduce Aswapati and his mission as a traveller of the worlds. I will read it now. This overt universe whose figures hide the secrets merged in superconscious light wrote clear the letters of its glowing code. A map of subtle signs surpassing thought was hung upon a wall of inmost mind, illumining the world's concrete images into significant symbols by its gloss. It offered to the intuitive exegete its reflex of the eternal mysteries. Ascending and descending twixt life's poles, the serried kingdoms of the graded law plunged from the everlasting into time, and glad of a glory of multitudinous mind, and rich with life's adventure and delight, and packed with the beauty of matter's shapes and hues, climbed back from time into undying self, up a golden ladder carrying the soul, tying with diamond threads the spirit's extremes. The question arises, what are these diamond threads? Is it just a simple ornament of language? I think not. You see, there is an explanation, and the mother has given it. What has the mother got to say about the diamond light? If we can understand how she saw the diamond threads, then we can understand the meaning of tying with diamond threads the spirit's extremes. On a human level, our mind conjures up an image perhaps of a Christmas tree and a child gazing in wonder and awe. That's not too wrong, by the way. But this time, the mother, when she's explaining the difference between joy and felicity, she says they are the base angles of a triangle whose apex is beatitude, the divine Ananda in its purest form of diamond light. So what ties together the spirit's extremes is the divine Ananda, and we can follow the mother's thought as she expresses her own idea of beatitude. The mother in the agenda says, beatitude contains within itself freshness and warmth, passivity and activity, action and repose, gentleness and tenderness. It is a paroxysm of joy. It is so strong that the body feels about to explode, and so it is forced to enlarge itself. The diamond light of beatitude has the power to dissolve all adverse forces. Nothing can resist it. No consciousness, no being, no adverse will can come near it without being instantly dissolved, because it is the light of the divine in its pure creative power. So what was first simply a simple decorative poetic device actually has a very deep and profound meaning if we can link it to what the mother has said. That was the first description that we have of the world stair, and the second description of the world stair. There are only two in that very long book. There are only two descriptions of what Sri Aurobindo means by the world stair, and this one is very strange indeed. In a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile, erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky. As if from matter's plinth and viewless base, to a top as viewless, a carved sea of worlds, climbing with foam-maned waves to the supreme, ascended towards breadths immeasurable. It hoped to soar into the ineffable's reign. 100 levels raised it to the unknown. So it towered up to heights intangible and disappeared in the hushed conscious vast, as climbs a storied temple tower to heaven, built by the aspiring soul of man to live near to his dream of the invisible. Infinity calls to it as it dreams and climbs. Its spire touches the apex of the world. Mounting into great voiceless stillnesses, it marries the earth to screened eternities. Amid the many systems of the One, made by an interpreting creative joy, alone it points us to our journey back, out of our long self-loss in nature's deeps. Planted in earth, it holds within it all realms. It is a brief compendium of the vast. This was the single stair to being's goal, a summary of the stages of the spirit, its copy of the cosmic hierarchies, refashioned in our secret air of self, a subtle pattern of the universe. It is within, below, without, above. When I was meditating on that last line, something rather odd happened. I found that I could change the meaning by the inflection of my voice, like this. It is within, below, without, above. The meaning of that would be that it is everywhere. But if I say it is within, below, without, above, the meaning has changed, hasn't it? Now, if that is mantric poetry, how is it that my own voice can change it? This thought really worried me. And then I realized what Sri Aurobindo had done with mantra. He had brought something new into mantra that was not there before. In Sri Aurobindo's mantra, there is something that reaches out to embrace us just as we are and to make us co-creators of of that reality that he is trying to express. I find it very difficult to say that. But the fact is that when I meditate on the fact that I could change the meaning with my voice, I'm not one who has what's called spiritual experiences, by the way. I don't see visions and I don't hear voices. But I felt as if I understood something that I hadn't understood before, that we are somehow a part of all this. We're a part of it. We're a part of the new world. We're a part of the mantra. We are co-creators, if you like. You know, a great poem like Savitri, without its readers, without its listeners, it's only marks on a page. Sri Aurobindo needs us, just as we need him. And on that note, I would like to not quite conclude, because I have one more thing to read you. I have not done justice to the extreme beauty of his writing until I have read one of the passages which celebrate the beauty of life. Now, what shall I have? And can I find it again? All right. Some of you have been reading this morning. It is a very beautiful passage. As far as heaven, as near as thought and hope, glimmered the kingdom of a griefless life. Above him in a new celestial vault, other than the heavens beheld by mortal eyes, as on a fretted ceiling of the gods, an archipelago of laughter and fire, stars swam apart in a rippled sea of sky. Towered spirals, magic rings of vivid hue, and gleaming spheres of strange felicity floated through distance like a symbol world. On the trouble and the toil they could not share, on the unhappiness they could not aid, impervious to life's suffering, struggle, grief, untarnished by its anger, gloom, and hate, unmoved, untouched, looked down great visioned plains, blissful forever in their timeless right, absorbed in their own beauty and content. Of their immortal gladness they lived sure, apart in their self-glory plunged, remote, burning they swam in a vague, lucent haze, an everlasting refuge of dream light, a nebula of the splendors of the gods, made from the musings of eternity, almost unbelievable by human faith. Hardly they seemed the stuff of things that are, as through a magic television's glass, outlined to some magnifying inner eye. They shone like images thrown from a far scene, too high and glad for mortal lids to seize, but near and real to the longing heart, and to the body's passionate thought and sense are the hidden kingdoms of beatitude. In some gross, unattained realm, which yet we feel, immune from the harsh clutch of death and time, escaping the search of sorrow and desire, in bright, enchanted, safe peripheries, forever wallowing in bliss they lie, in dream and trance and muse before our eyes, across a subtle vision's inner field, with wide rapturous landscapes fleeting from the sight, the figures of the perfect kingdom pass, and behind them leave a shining memory's trail. imagined scenes or great eternal worlds, dream-caught or sensed, they touch our hearts with their depths. Unreal seeming, yet more real than life, happier than happiness, truer than things true. If dreams these were, or captured images, dreams truth made false as vain realities, in a swift eternal moment fixed there live, forever recalled come back to longing eyes, calm heavens of imperishable light, illumined continents of violent peace, oceans and rivers of the mirth of God, and griefless countries under purple suns. I think I told you that Amal Kiran once told me, he asked Sri Aurobindo, are those suns really purple? And Sri Aurobindo said yes. And it's the sort of question I would have asked too. Both of us forget that to this poet, to the seer, there is no such thing as unreality. Everything is real. Everything is true. Thank you.